Front Row Rugby. Interviews with rugby legends with Peter Stemmet.
Today, you are going to get a front row seat to the incredible Springbok career of former captain Gary Teichmann. Gary, welcome to Front Row Rugby.
Cheers. Thanks for having me on, Peter.
Now, before we begin our conversation, Gary, let's take a look at today's trivia question. In 1999, the Springboks narrowly beat Australia at Newlands in the Tri-Nations. What was the score? Now, if you know the answer to the question, you can put it in the comment section down below. And we'll also find out if Gary knows the answer, but we'll do that at the end of our conversation. Gary, let's begin in 1995. Tell me how you were feeling ahead of your test debut against Wales.
I think, I'd been involved in the squad right up to the sort of the last selection. But I always knew that Tiaan Strauss was ahead of me, so I knew that I wasn't going to get in. And then to get that call up after the World Cup was quite a surprise. I think them having done so well and achieved so much, suddenly to get a outsider in, I think it was big surprise, but a big honor. And I only played the one game, and then they went overseas, and I didn't make that side. So I thought I'd done my one test cap, and I was happy.
Gary, you were actually on that tour to Argentina in 1993, and as you mentioned, you had sort of been part of it. Maybe Tiaan Strauss was ahead of you, but how frustrating was it that you had to wait so long to actually get a test cap?
I think I was just happy to be in the mix. At that stage, they would take two squads because you'd have the midweek games. So that was always nice to be able to prove yourself, and you were in with the coach, and so it was all. You were all part of it, so it gave you opportunity to prove yourself. If you had a really good game in the midweek, then maybe you'd get a selection for a test.
Hey, if you're enjoying this video, why not hit the like button?
And as you say, you did get your debut against Wales. That was after the 1995 Rugby World Cup. How disappointing was it for you to miss out on that squad?
I think I realized that I wasn't going to be in the 95 World Cup squad. I had a good feeling, so I knew I wasn't going to make that team. So it didn't come as a disappointment because you anticipated,
So Gary, after that, Kitch Christie was out of the picture. Andre Markgraaff had become the new coach, and then you were very much part of the mix throughout 1996. It was now the professional era. There was this new competition called the Tri-Nations. How determined were you guys to try and win that competition?
Basically, I came into the World Cup team. So I think those guys were still on a high from the World Cup. The All Blacks were hurting very much from that. So that the first Tri-Nations, they certainly came over here to prove a point. And I think Sean Fitzpatrick, that was his opportunity to prove a point. And it was a hell of a series that we played in that Tri-Nations. And I think we were very determined, but I think maybe at the end of the day, they just wanted it a bit more. They wanted to prove a point.
What was going through your mind when Francois Pienaar left the field at Newlands in that Tri-Nations test match, and then you took over as captain?
Francois had done such an amazing job for the World Cup. So to lose him halfway through that game, it was a big concern, because together and winning that World Cup. And then when I was approached, I'd only just sort of taken over the Sharks setup, so it was, and I think I'd played 6 tests. So to suddenly be thrown the captaincy was a big surprise, and I think I've got Andre obviously saw something in me that I could handle it. I remember saying to my dad, I said, I'm happy just playing tests and didn't really need that extra pressure. And he said you only get offered it once, and if don't think you'll get another opportunity, and so took it. Yeah.
And Gary, as we now know, South Africa became the first Springbok team to lose a test series at home to New Zealand. I've had a couple of former Springboks on this show before to talk about that, and they've given their reasons why they think it went that way. I know that you mentioned that maybe the All Blacks wanted it a little bit more, but I've also heard that there was a divide in the camp, especially between the World Cup guys and the newer guys, and there was this discrepancy in salary at the time. I wonder if there's anything that you can tell me about that.
The way South Africa contracted players, the guys that all were involved in the World Cup got sort of three years, I think it was. In fact, we were always separated when it came to those discussions. So they had long-term contracts, and at that stage, I think there might have been two or three of us that weren't part of that squad, and we were sort of on match play. So whatever you played, you got paid for. So it was a bit unfair in a way, but at the same time, those guys had achieved a lot of success. But I think the unfortunate thing, I think South African rugby as a whole didn't really have a plan with professionalism, and they knew it was coming. So I think suddenly everyone was being professional, and we weren't prepared, and especially on the administrative side, they weren't prepared on how they were going to deal with it. So I think there was, not that there was unhappiness, but I think at that level, if there's a lot of uncertainty or there's a little bit of a dispute, then it always makes it pretty difficult. And from the All Blacks perspective, they were just had one common goal, and that was to win that series. I think we all know they were a formidable side, and on the unfortunate, well, for them, on the day of that final, they couldn't pull it off, and our guys deserved to win. But they were a really good side.
Gary, after that series defeat to New Zealand, Andre Markgraaff named the team that would go on the end-of-year tour in 1996, and Francois Pienaar had been dropped, and then you were installed as the permanent captain. What was your reaction to Francois being dropped?
The one thing I couldn't do was try and replicate what Francois. He is a totally different captain to me, and I knew that if I tried to follow in his footsteps, then I wasn't gonna get the buy-in of the players. And I was pretty fortunate in that a lot of the senior players that had been involved in the World Cup, and I must mention the late Joost van der Westhuizen. I mean, he was one of the first guys that got up there and said, "Guys, if we're gonna be successful, we need to all pull together and support Gary in this position." So, I was lucky. That was a team that was well established, and I was able to take over. But it was difficult, I mean, Francois was so respected throughout the country that it wasn't an easy period.
I think it's fair to say, Gary, that you yourself became a fan favorite as well with the public. But let's talk about that 1996 end-of-year tour. It was a really, really good one for the Springboks, some really great results. Talk to me about beating France in France.
I think in my career, we had some good results in France. And the one that sticks out in my mind was that big win with Nick Mallet. But it's a difficult place to tour. It's a very different culture. You never know what you can expect from the French team. They can either really turn it on or they get onto the field and they don't perform. You're very unsure what to expect. So, I think I'd had a good time with the Sharks, and I just try to follow that same road and what we had achieved at the Sharks. And I suppose outside of being I'm not a sort of vocal captain, but I would always try and ensure that on the field I would try and make the least mistakes and try and really give 120%, because I knew if I did that, then the players would do similar. So that was my sort of approach to it. Always enjoyed touring France, but I suppose because we had a bit of success there.
Gary, tell me, what was your relationship like with Andre Markgraaff?
It was good, hey. Andre, I still chat to him today, and I've seen him up only the other day, saw him up in Kimberley. Andre, he's one of those guys that commits 100%. He eats, sleeps, and drinks rugby. And if it's business, he does the same. So I respected the amount of time and effort that and the passion that he put into that position. Unfortunately, he had that incident, and where he supported us. When I say us, it was, by that time there were a lot more of the guys that weren't involved in the World Cup '95 that were starting to come through, likes of Andre Venter, Henry Honeyball, and quite key players. So there was always every time we went on a tour, there was a renegotiation of what we were going to get paid. And that's where Andre, because of it, he was very much involved in SA Rugby. He looked after us and made sure that we were looked after. So I've got a lot of respect for Andre, and he was the one that gave me the opportunity to captain the Springboks.
And then, of course, he was out in 1997 and he was replaced by Carel du Plessis. What did you make of Carel as a coach?
I think where it was difficult for Carel was that he had no history of coaching. And unfortunately, when you come at that level, no matter what kind of player you were in the past, you need to bring different ideas, and you need to keep the players not interested, but you need to keep them on their toes and bring new ideas. So it was difficult with Carel, because he hadn't had any experience in the coaching side of things. So as much as I've got a huge amount of respect for Carel, I think it was probably a decision made by SA Rugby that they didn't really consider that side of it. And unfortunately, we were like a team that didn't have direction. And I've got to put my hand up there too, because I could have also got more vocal and try and maybe I should have supported it more and tried to explain to him more that we needed that more of a direction. Then, he came with this. He wanted to play an expansive game, but you can't just. Mac always put it very cleverly, and he related it to cricket. You don't see a test batsman going in and trying to hit a 6 first ball. You build an innings, and you've got to, in rugby, I think you've got to earn that right to play that expansive game, and I think that's where we battled to have that direction.
How disappointing was it to go down to the British and Irish Lions?
Huge disappointment. You only get one chance. You're lucky if you get one chance in your career. So I honestly believe we had a better team. I think that Durban game, I don't think. I mean, we scored 3 tries to none, and we still lost the game. It was quite unheard of. And I think with that British Lions series, the team that wins the first game, that pressure just is relieved, and especially if you are the visiting team. So the pressure mounts on the home team if you lost that first game, and that's exactly what happened. And so we gave a lot of penalties away in that Durban game, and we didn't convert our opportunities in terms of we scored the tries but didn't kick the points. So yeah, it was a tough one to take. But I think that's part of the game.
And then Nick Mallet took over from Carel du Plessis. How much different was the atmosphere in the camp under Nick?
I was sort of looking at retiring from international rugby because I'd been through Andre, Carel, I had kids before, and just I was really enjoying my rugby at the Sharks level. So I think Henry Honeyball, we were quite close, and he was pretty much the same. And then, Nick came in, and again, he had that experience. He had coached in France, so he had coaching experience. And I think you will always, if you chat to Nick, he's a very strong with his opinions and the way he wants to play the game. And I think that was very, we had come from a situation where we had no direction, and suddenly he came in, and this is how we are going to play, and this is what I expect of you. And exactly, it sort of brought us all together. It was the first time he actually brought in, after a test, you'd get a piece of paper under your door, and he'd give you the 5 or 6 points where you performed well, and 5 or 6 where you can improve. So there was a lot of feedback, and that was quite refreshing.
And then into 1998 and the Tri-Nations, it was a very special competition for us that year. Talk to me about the 2 away wins that year.
We were really starting to get momentum in terms of winning games, and we went over, played Australia in Perth, and actually we should never have won that game. I think Matt Burke missed a kick right in front of the poles, and I think you scored right towards the end. It was a shocking game. In fact, I remember getting that note under my door, and there was only 5 things that there was nothing that we had done well. So it was a bit of luck. And then we went to New Zealand, Wellington, and I'd been going there a number of years provincially with the Sharks and at Springbok level. So I'm trying to think which game it was. It was, I think, the 100th test, I think, because Derek Watts was over there from Carte Blanche, and I'll never forget it because Wellington, it wasn't the new stadium, so the change rooms were pretty small and like real concretey type change rooms. And after the game, we were obviously all just celebrating, and their door was closed down the road, and then what's his name? Old Derek decides he wants to try get into the All Blacks change room, and he's knocking on the door. They don't know. He pushes it open, and the guy comes to kick him out, but you know how tall Derek is. He wasn't used to seeing such a tall reporter. Anyway, Derek managed to get himself into that change room. And I remember you saying to me, this is as close as it gets to winning the World Cup. So that meant quite a bit.
And how about that come from behind win against the All Blacks in Durban?
I think by that stage we were on such a roll, and we knew that we were going to win. In fact, I remember Mark Andrews after half time, we were walking out, and Mark said to me, Gary, you must just stick to the game plan. And I said, Mark, we 23-5 down at half time. It's not like we're playing a second division side, we're playing the All Blacks, and you say stick to the game plan. And it certainly doesn't seem to be working. Anyway, we stuck to our guns, and then again I think in teams you need those guys that can pull off something special, and then you need the sort of grafters, and Just was one of those guys, and he sort of ignited it with that little snipe around the line-out and scored a try, and then suddenly we started believing. And in the context of the Tri-Nations, it didn't make any difference if we won or not. We still had to beat Australia in Joburg. But Nick made the point at half time. He said, there's 50,000 people that have paid to come and watch you, and you can't perform like you have in the first half. So forget about what doesn't make any difference. It's those 50,000 that have paid good money to come watch you. And it was a great comeback, and it was nice to do that to them because they had done it to us before.
It was very memorable indeed. In fact, Gary, I can tell you that I clearly remember watching that game with 2 All Black supporters. So you can imagine the seesaw atmosphere. But I got to have the last laugh that day.
John Hart and Nick were actually, because now it had become quite professional, so they actually set up a golf game on a Sunday to try get the players to mix more. And it was quite funny because we won that as well.
Sort of a double whammy that weekend. Gary, on to the 1998 end-of-year tour. We were still winning, but the performances were not as clinical as we had seen earlier in the year. Now, I've heard several theories. Some people say that there was end-of-year fatigue. Others say that the opposition were a little bit more up for it because we were on such a winning streak, so they were determined to beat us. I've also heard things like interference from Alan Solomons with regards to Bobby Skinstad. I'd like to hear your take.
People underestimate the amount of rugby we had played. In those days, the subs weren't used as much. You had the impact players like Bobby was fulfilling that role. But I think that was the main thing. Obviously, we are coming off such a high, winning the first Tri-Nations. And that's where the All Blacks are really good. If you're number one, everyone's going to lift their game to try and beat you. They're going to play an extra 10 to 20% harder to try and knock the number one off the ladder. So I do believe those teams, they lifted their game, but we were still winning. And I think maybe Nick was thinking the following year when the World Cup, and maybe he read it as that they had improved more than we probably weren't on top of our game. And I think that's where he started messing with a few positions, and it started with moving Andre Venter to lock to accommodate Bobby, who to me is a brilliant player, but he was fulfilling a great role, and it was working for us at that stage. And really all in preparation, I think, for trying to do something different in 1999 at the World Cup. So yeah, it was unfortunate, and I still, I still felt that we were doing enough. It wasn't probably a team game. In fact, against Ireland, Bobby, I think, scored 2 tries or 1 try and created another one. He had a huge. So it was more of an individual performance that got us out of trouble there. And then against Wales, we just squeaked in. So the games were a lot closer. But if you rewind back to 97, we were thumping them by 40, 50 points. So, that also doesn't last.
No, for sure. And then into 1999, Gary, I know that you had quite a few injuries in 99, and that limited your play time. As it turns out, your final test match was against the All Blacks in Dunedin, 28-0. How devastating was that defeat?
To come from where we were and suddenly we put in a performance that certainly wasn't acceptable. It was a funny week in the build-up to that, because at that stage, I mean, Henry Honeyball, I think, was out. We had a couple of injuries, and that's one thing also in that 17 test run. We were also very fortunate with injuries. We didn't have a lot of injuries. And in the build-up to that test, we were concerned that the weather was going to play a big part. And we practiced as though it was a wet game, the typical Dunedin type weather. And come the day, it was just sunshine. So we just couldn't adapt to that change. And it wasn't a great performance from us. So quite disappointing. We had come from Wales. I think we had gone and played suddenly a game in Wales, which half-empty Millennium Stadium. We had a couple of issues off the field before that, and then flew from there to New Zealand. So I don't think a great preparation, and then just a poor performance on the Saturday.
And the next thing you know, the World Cup squad is announced for 1999, and you were omitted from that. Did you receive any warning or a courtesy call, at least?
My relationship with Nick had really it had gone backwards, I think, and we had always had a very open relationship, very straight talking relationship, and suddenly I just felt I was being excluded from when we were down when we were in Wales to the trip, and he was confiding quite a bit with Solly, who at that stage was involved with the Stormers. So it was quite difficult, because we had come such a long way, and then suddenly that relationship had disintegrated, and so I knew there was something bothering him, or that something wasn't right, and then I basically I got a call. I was on the physio bench at the Sharks, and then got a call, and he said that basically, he's going to go with Bobby, who had also been injured, and that he was I think going to take Anton Lennon. So I'd sort of gone from 1 to 5 in a short space of time. So it's sport.
Absolutely. Gary, I also spoke to Tiaan Strauss on this show a few months ago, and as you will well know, he was dropped from the team ahead of the 1995 Rugby World Cup. And I spoke to him about having to be in an environment among friends, family, colleagues and that, and hearing conversations and being part of conversations to the extent of, you should be in the team, why are you not in the team, they've made a mistake by leaving you out. I'm sure that you must have been in a similar environment. That couldn't have been nice, right?
You got to take it from where it comes. I mean, if I'd be very surprised if your family say, you shouldn't be in that team. especially my mother. She actually didn't believe I was dropped. She thought that he was just resting me. So, yeah, I think it's not a nice space. But I think as a player, 80% of the time, if you should be in that side or you shouldn't be in that side. And I think especially if you've come a long way, and that was a disappointing thing, is that, if Nick had said to me, shit, excuse my language, that you're not number one at the moment, but you need to play yourself into, and I'm going to give you opportunities on this tour or the World Cup to play into that position, but at the moment you're not there. But I went from 1 to 5, and then that's and I think sometimes a coach maybe feels that because you're a captain, that you have to play, and it would be quite difficult, but I think I certainly would have accepted it, and until I proved that I should have been from a performance point of view, I wouldn't want to be in that side if you weren't performing just because you're the captain. But it becomes quite a hard conversation for the coach.
Gary, I've heard that a few years later, Nick actually apologized to you. Is that true?
Yeah, we talk every now and again. No, I think you move on there. I've certainly been very fortunate, and I'd love to have played in a World Cup, but I also wouldn't throw those times that we had winning those 17 tests away either. So yeah, he has apologized, and it is what it is. He also, you got to appreciate, as coaches, you've got to make some tough decisions. The problem I had was that, Bobby had been injured. He also was in a pretty similar space as where I was. We hadn't had a time we hadn't played a lot on the field because of injuries.
Okay, Gary, who was your toughest opponent?
Well, I'm glad I didn't play against Mark Andrews. I only played with him, but I think most, not tough, but most skillful and hard was Zinzan.
And is there a particularly funny moment that you can share with us from your time with the Springboks?
The first person I revert to is Dick Muir, and yeah, I'm sure everyone answers the same question with his name in it. Hey? I think Andre was coach. He was coaching the test team, and then Nick Mallet and Rhys Edwards were doing the midweek side, and I think between Kevin Putt and Dick, they decided to give Nick a sleeping pill on the way to the midweek game. I wasn't there, but when I heard about it and how he fought this Dormican sleeping pill to stay awake during the game, and then got back. I think they just won. Fortunately, they won, and then just collapsed on the bus, fast asleep. Yeah, no, we had some. And that's. I think I was very fortunate to play in a bit of the amateur era, and then play in the professional era. And I don't think I'd swap that for just professional. We had some great times amateur, great times professional too.
Funny enough, Gary, I had Val Bartman on the show quite early on, and he also mentioned Dick Muir. And when he mentioned Dick, it was almost as if you got the sense that he'd been waiting years to tell someone the story. So that's quite funny.
He certainly kept everyone on their toes.
Gary, is there a player right now currently who you admire?
So I just think Eban is just playing out of his shoes, and he's been doing it for a long time. It hasn't just been one season. He's just a phenomenal player. So I look at him and wonder how long he can carry on, and hopefully he's got another World Cup because I think without him that Springbok side is not. I think it's that much more potent, and because, and even when he came to the Sharks, he would get onto that field and he'd just perform, and that's what you want to see from a top player, especially when they come back to the provinces. And then I've got a huge amount of respect for Sia and where he's come from and how he's handled it, and he's just a phenomenal person and a great player.
And what are you up to these days, Gary?
I started a business in 1995 because I had time off during the World Cup, and we started a little plant tire business, and that's just grown and grown. So it's now more of a construction business, and then we got other sides to it. Some actually involved in a drilling business with Adrian Garvey, and then some cane hauling business. So mainly in Africa. But it's good fun. We've got phenomenal people, and I think that's what helped me in business is my experience in rugby, is that you need that team around you to perform, and I'm fortunate to have a great team.
Sounds good. Gary, let's finish off with the trivia question. In 1999, the Springboks narrowly beat Australia at Newlands in the Tri-Nations. What was the score? Do you know the answer, Gary?
I can't even remember if I was on tour with Nick Mallet or Andre Markgraaff. I'm going to take a flyer. 22-18.
All right. And you know what, when I was preparing for this and I was picking a question from 1999, I thought I can't pick something from a match that you actually played in because that would make it too easy. But in fact, the correct score was actually 10-9.
Jeez. Where did they play that? In Newlands?
That was at Newlands, yeah.
I think I was probably in Wales by then.
Gary, it was lovely having you on Front Row Rugby today. An absolute pleasure to speak to a Springbok captain, and thank you for sharing those fascinating stories with us. And I hope that we can have you on again in the future.
Thanks, Peter, and nice to chat to you.
Front Row Rugby. Interviews with rugby legends with Peter Stemmet.